We continue with the book of King Og of Bashan, the enemy of Zeus and Yahweh, Nephilim and Rephaim, giants of Genesis and other texts of the Old Testament. And in Hebrew and ancient Greek, Hebrew Og, in ancient Greek Og. And he was an Amorite king of Bashan who was slain along with his army by Moses and his men in the battle of Edrei. In the book of Numbers, it says that when Moses had previously conquered in the battle of Jahaz, he was an Amorite king, the ruler of Bashan, which contained 60 walled cities and many unwalled towns. And he was huge. And please refer to the part 1 of this two-part series. And I will read for you now the Professor Scott Nogle's Chair of Near East Language and Civilization, University of Washington, PDF. And I won't go into the footnotes and references, but he was known in ancient Greece as the Aegean Ogyges of Viotia. Viotia is in central Greece. And also the biblical Og of Bashan, reflections of the same myth. So he was what? A giant. We know that ancient Cretans were giants, and it says so in the Old Testament, that the Philistines were from Crete, and they were giants. And they have found giant skeletons in Crete. So this is not the first time we talk about Philistines from ancient giants from ancient Crete. Now, the Aegean Ogyges of Viotia, which is in just about an hour north of Athens, Greece, and the biblical Og of Bashan, reflections of the same myth, he says. Myths knows no boundaries. Its exchange among cultures as quickly as merchandise, as fluidly as movements of people. This is especially true of numerous ancient Near Eastern myths, which often appear in Grecian, Guise, and Hellenic writings. And indeed, M.L. West asserts Greece is part of Asia, Greek literature is Near Eastern literature, though an awareness of cultural process of exchange has led a number of scholars to search for shared aspects of Aegean and Semitic mythology, ancient Hebrew mythology. As reflected in their respective literatures, it's clear that much yet lies undiscovered. In most cases, connections between the Aegean, that is Greece, and Semitic mythology, that is Israel, are difficult, if not impossible, to prove. However, this does not make the search for shared mythology an unworthy enterprise, as W. Burkett notes. My emphasis is deliberately on providing evidence for correspondences and for the likelihood of borrowings, if in certain cases the material themselves do not provide. Now, moreover, if we are to proceed with comparisons, we must possess a clear definition of what is meant by myth. So in this study, I'll employ definitions of myth proposed by R. Mundy, who views myths not merely as narratives, but a conceptual foci expressed in literature. For example, the names of gods are conceptual foci to which the ancients attach certain functions, themes, and relationships with other gods. The mention of a divine name, therefore, conjures in mind of the hearer a litany of information associations. This definition of myth also accounts for local divergencies in otherwise similar mythic traditions. Mythic elements derive their force precisely from the fact that they suggest rather than explain, and that they constitute cores of meaning without having been put together by any definitive pattern. And they function as foundation stones for certain basic assumptions in the life of a community or a person. So for this reason, comparison of Aegean with Near Eastern myth requires that we keep a holistic eye open to similar ideas and motifs expressed in the myths account. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. For example, for this reason, comparison of Aegean Near Eastern myths requires we keep a holistic eye open to similar ideas. It's with these caveats and goals in mind that I'll examine a possible link between Aegean myth of the heroic deluge survivor and the legendary founder of Viotia, Ogyges, or the biblical King Og of Bashan. The Aegean hero Ogyges is known to us only in part through the work of Aeschylus Hesiod, Empedocles, Pindar, Sophocles, and Heliodorus, and has been connected by some scholars with Noah, Utnapishtim, and Deucalion. Deucalion means man of good omen, just like Noah means man of good omen in Semitic. Yet despite some affinities with these characters, no sure equation has been made. And now we're going on to page 4 of 17. The reason to connect Ogigos of Viatia and Og of Bashan is the philosophically similarity between their names, a similarity which J. Fontenrose parenthetically noted almost 40 years ago without further comment. The efforts to find an etymology for the Greek Ogigos have been, for the most part, unsuccessful. The ancient mythographer Pherecydes of Syros, about 600 BC, linked the name Ogigos to Ogygia and Okeanos, meaning ocean in Greek, the ocean or edge of the world. Moderns, on the other hand, suggest Semitic and Afro-Asiatic etymologies deriving Ogigos from Semitic root, draw a circle, or from the late Egyptian, Og, a type of water or flood. And according to E. Meyer, the Greek name's connection to water relates to the flooding of nearby Lake Copius. This would fit the scheme presented by J. Fontenrose, who in the footsteps of Pherecydes sees Ogigos as originally not the flood survivor, but the flood itself. M. Astur, with other aspects of Ogigos myth in mind, suggests that we derive the name from the Semitic, and each of the etymologies is compelling. After all, Greek names with Semitic origin are not unknown. Iapetos means Japheth. Gavminos means Quadmonotis. The biblical Og, on the other hand, recorded in as Og in Greek, commonly derived from Semitic root suggested above. However, the root does not occur in biblical Hebrew with this connotation. Aside from the personal name in question, the root appears only in connection with the bread cakes and baking. Thus, C. Rabin derives the name Og from the South Semitic root Gog, meaning man, which he also relates Semitically to the roots Babel, slaying, and Mok, deride. And as with the Greek Gogigos, multiple etymologies also are possible for Hebrew Og, and perhaps probably indeed give the high frequency of puns and etiological word plays in antiquity. There may exist more than one popular etymology, and though we cannot be certain as to which of these postulates lurk behind the Greek and Hebrew names, the similarity in sound between them suggests that we're dealing with the same figure. The primordial flood survivors. However, where etymology fails to elucidate, textual tradition does not, and it's here where Ogigos' rule as a survivor of the primal flood comes into play. Og of Bashan is recorded in the Bible as having been the last of the Rephaim, the denizens of the underworld, Joshua 12:4. In Talmudic and Midrashic tradition, however, Og of Bashan is recorded as having survived the deluge by sitting on top of Noah's Ark. Whether the Aegean and biblical floods are the same, of course, is impossible to know, but that both names identify giants who survived primal massive inundations is compelling. The pejorative link. The link between Ogigos and Og is strengthened further by a derogatory reference to the legendary giants. In Psalms 135:11, Og is grouped with other despised people and labeled as one of the royalty of the Canaanites, quote unquote. Accordingly, however, he appears in the Bible, we are informed that he was wiped out along with other unworthies. This is from Deuteronomy 3:11, for example, calls him the last remnant of the Rephaim, who elsewhere are equated with Zamzumin, or babblers, Deuteronomy 2:20-21. Moreover, if we accept C. Rabin's observation that the etymology for Og relates to the roots babble and slang and mock deride, the pejorative aspect of the myth giant is clear. Such references are mirrored in the Greek myth of Ogigos, where his mother, Gaia, or Earth, similarly is debased. Further, Gaia is linked to the destructive forces represented by the giants through her aspect of Gaia Pelori, meaning huge, gigantic, gargantuan. Pelorio means huge. Gaia Pelore then is not simply big, not simply huge, she is monstrous, and the repeated strident pejorative epithet is a strongly determinative of our response to Gaia as a similarly insistent big fool is of the response to Hesiod's brother. Moreover, it's been long noticed that the Pelori group of epithets bind together Mother Earth and her huge unruly offspring, the giants, enemies of the divine. This is page 6 of 17. The pejorative reference to both Ogyges and Og stem undoubtedly from the fact that both are regarded as enemies of the chief gods, Zeus and Yahweh, respectively. Regarding the latter, we may note that according to numerology, Numbers 21:14, the battles against Og and Sihon were significant enough to be incorporated into a now lost book of the Wars of Yahweh. That's lost, the book of the Wars of Yahweh. Yet the line connected the two figures runs deeper. In the Odyssey, Zeus banishes the king of the giants, Evrymedon, to Tartarus, the underworld, for sexually violating his wife and sister, the beautiful daughter of Kronos and Rhea, Hera. And as a result, Hera bears Prometheus, a hero and deity of fire. In Genesis 6, the Genesis giants, Genesis 6, 1-4, the semi-divine and colossal Nephilim, Gigantes in Greek, giants, who were identified in Numbers 13:33 with Anakim, gigantic denizens of the underworld, create an act of unprecedented hubris by impregnating the daughters of mortals. Genesis 6:4 tells us that their offspring became, quote, the heroes of old, the men of renown, end quote. Like the violation of Hera of Greek mythology, this act brings punishment, though instead of banishment, God brings upon the earth the great deluge. Thus, in both the Greek and biblical accounts, gigantic, semi-divine beings who have connections with the underworld are punished from on high for sexual acts which result in the births of mighty heroes. Such a string of connections, I would posit, is evidence of shared myth. Underworld Connections. There is another parallel between Ogyges of Boeotia and Og of Bashan, namely their association with death and the underworld. Hesiod tells us that the gigantic enemies of Zeus are banished to Tartarus, which lay beneath the sea and the earth. Homer describes Tartarus as the darkest depths of the house of Hades, the kingdom of the dead. These and similar textual references compel J. Fontenrose to remark that sea and death belong to the myth of Ogyges from the beginning. Interestingly, the Phoenician inscription at Byblos threatens to invoke the Semitic Og as a dead spirit to pursue grave robbers. For opening his sarcophagus and for troubling his bones, the Og will search out for me, the mighty, quote unquote. The Neo-Punic Latin bilingual tomb inscription also makes supplication. The divine Rephaim. Not only does the name Og appear in a list of names found in Ugarit, but there is also reference to Rupu, who was king of eternity and who, like Og of Bashan, lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei. We may add to this the mention of Og's bed in Deuteronomy 3:11, which is according to J. Starkey, son du un dolman. Perhaps we also should add to this possibility of reading the description of Shihon's city in Deuteronomy 3:6 as the city of the dead. Should we also see significance in the fact that just prior to engaging Og and the Shihon in battle, Numbers 21:10, the Israelites first camped in Oboth, a name connected with ghosts and necromancy, and then in Abarim, ruins of those passed away. These issues aside, it's clear that there was a figure Og who was intimately tied to the netherworld and who was the object of popular veneration in the Levant. Thus, Og's connection with tomb inscriptions and the Rephaim, the deceased wanderers of the underworld, is highly suggestive. We're on page 8 now. Military associations. Moreover, the Ugarit Rephaim have ostensible military connections. Not only is one of their kind referred to as muhur, the Ugaritic word for soldier, but the Rephaim appear riding in chariots. The Aegean Ogigos and biblical Og similarly are connected with military exploits, King Ogigos via his battle with Zeus and Og via his battle with Moses. The offspring of the gigantic Nephilim are also said to be heroes, quote-unquote, the men of renown, Genesis 6:4, and compare Ezekiel 32:27, which mentions a class of warriors who await Pharaoh in Sheol, the heroes, the fallen ones of old. Cosmic battles. Moreover, according to Hellenistic sources, Zeus's battle against Ogigos, ally Typhos, to whom we shall return, was accompanied by theophanic wonders, a quaking earth and the underworld, the blackened and rumbling sky, fires and seething sea. While we do not find all of these elements in the biblical account of the war against Og, we do hear of a few of them. For example, Rahab tells Joshua's spies that because of the battles with Og and Sihon, the terror of the Israelites quakes the land, Joshua 2:9. In Numbers 21:28-30, the bard's pen thrice describes Sihon's destruction of Moab as a conflagration which Yahweh has extinguished. Their fire has perished. Perhaps we should also translate in the lost book of the wars of Yahweh, Numbers 21:14, mentioned above, not as a place name, but as the well-attested noun tempest. Waheb by storm and the wadis in Arnon. The lament in Ezekiel 32 mentions above in connection with the mighty warriors, quote-unquote, who have fallen to Sheol, opens with a comparison of the Pharaoh to the sea monster and describes his doom as the blackening of the sun and stars. The Leviathan and the ban on Mount Hermon. Deuteronomy 3:8-9 informs us that the Og's territory included Mount Hermon, which the Sidonians called Syrian, and the Amorites Senir. And in 1 Chronicles 5:23 tell that Baal of Hermon was worshipped there. In the Roman period, both Zeus and the marine deity Leucothea, also named Ino, daughter of Cadmus, and aunt of Dionysus, were venerated on that mountain. Og's link to this sacred mountain, therefore, is particularly interesting. It also might explain the problem which has long puzzled scholars. At least 2 Aramaic incantation bowls sum up their spells by threatening to bring down upon the accursed the ban, the prohibition, and the anathema which came down upon Mount Hermon, and upon the Leviathan, the sea monster, and upon Sodom and Gomorrah. In his exhaustive study of the Aramaic fragments of the books of Enoch found at Qumran, J.T. Milik remarks that whereas, quote, the curse of Leviathan and the sea, and also that of Sodom and Gomorrah, have a good biblical ring about them, the curse of Mount Hermon, on the other hand, has no biblical parallel, end quote. Thus, Milik identifies this section in a quotation from the Book of Giants. Though Milik's identification of this fragment is undoubtedly correct and apropos for what is about to be said, the curse on Mount Hermon does not have biblical precedent in the account of Og's defeat. Not only is Og associated with Mount Hermon, but in Deuteronomy 3:6 and 7, Og's demise is explicitly labeled a ban, hence the identical term found in the Aramaic incantation texts. This would explain why the giants are equated with Mount Hermon, also in 1 Enoch 6:1-6. Page 10. The Aegean Ogigos and the biblical Og of Bashan. Moreover, if we see in these magical texts the reference to the traditions involving the giants Og and Sihon, when the mention of the Leviathan and the sea in those same texts is noteworthy. The name of the Leviathan, Ahiyah, is preserved in later Manichaean tradition as gigantic enemy of none other than the archangel Raphael. More on this figure below. Even more remarkable is the fact that the Babylonian Talmud tractate Nida 61a is identified as the father of Og and Shihon. Thus, traditions regarding the giant Og seem to have involved also the sea and the Leviathan, a Roman veneration of Leucothea on Mount Hermon and Ezekiel 32. The link to fire. Further, both Ogyges and Og appear traditionally linked to fire. We already have mentioned the god of fire Prometheus, the child of Hera's illicit union with giant Erymedon, which brought about the banishment of the Titans. And the Titans were around, they were giants, they were around before the gods of Olympus. Now, in addition, the wife of Ogyges' companion Deucalion was named Pyrrha, meaning fiery. Thus, Astur asserts is akin to the Egyptian story of the shipwrecked sailor, wherein the only survivor of the ship's crew, quote, landed on an island belonging to a serpent who threatened to reduce him into ashes and told him that all his family had been consumed by fire that fell from heaven, end quote. The motif of flood alongside the serpent's island, which Astur avers may be called Island of Fire, is similar to the accounts of both Odysseus, that is Ulysses, who survived a shipwreck by making way to the island Ogygia, and to Danae and Perseus, who were cast into the sea in a chest and who landed on the island of Seriphos, both serpent and blaze. Thus, Astur concludes that the name of the rescue island, Ogygia, and of the hero Ogyges should be derived from the Semitic root burn flame. Moreover, the battle between Hercules and the giants takes place at Phlegra, meaning burning lands. Talmudic tradition confirms the connection to fire, not only with Noah, but with Og of Bashan. Apparently, the torrents of the primal flood withstood by Og were mingled with fire, hot to the point of scalding. Had it not been for Og's incredible strength, he too would have been consumed. A link to fire can also be found in the Tarkate Sanhedrin 108b. Quote, Noah rebuked them and spoke words to them that were hard as fiery flints. They derided them. They said to him, Old man, what is this ark for? He replied, The Holy One, blessed be he, will bring a flood upon you. A flood of what they jeered, of a flood of fire. If a flood of fire, we have Aletha, end quote. We also may parallel Og's mighty strength with the Greeks' myth of giants whom the gods were unable to kill without mortal help. Page 11, necklaces and giants. Another link between the two myths concerns the Egyptian city of Thebes, which is known to have housed the cult of Anubis. M. Bernal relates Anubis to the Semitic root meaning necklace, due to the goddess' association with jewelry necklaces. If Bernal is correct, this would parallel the geographical description of the Viotian Thebes, because the first Thebes was actually about an hour ride north of Greece. And those Thebans went to construct Thebes of Egypt. So, if Bernal is correct, this would parallel the geographical description of Viotian Thebes as a necklace and the etymology of Harmonia, Cadmus's queen, which means striking together. However, ancient commentators like Rashi use the root with another meaning, which is more opposite here, meaning giants. It's probably no coincidence, therefore, that the word appears in reference to the Rephaim like Og, who lived before the primal flood. Furthermore, E. McLaurin notes that the principal strongholds of the biblical Anakim, the giants, are later known as Philistine cities, suggested that the word may be related to Greek anax. Anax has four meanings, of which the first two agree nicely with what has been said thus far. The gods, Homeric heroes, the masters of the house, and shipmaster. He also notes that the adjective anaxialos, lord of the sea, occurs as an epithet of Poseidon Zeus, Demeter, and Urania. Such Aegean connections lead McLaurin to add that the three tribes of the Anakim given in the Bible, Sheshai, Talmai, and Achiman, may be related to the Aegean names Washasha, Telemachos, and Acheon, respectively. Fertility, snakes, and cows. Bashan and Viotia's etymological associations. The link between the characters' respective abodes, Viotia and Bashan, is equally interesting. The biblical Bashan commonly has been associated with the Arabic root batun, meaning soft and fertile ground. The Proto-Semitic being represented in Hebrew text by the letter C, this fits well with what is known of Viotia. Its irrigation and marsh drainage systems provided its inhabitants with even ever abundant yields of crops. As Diodorus Siculus records, the Kephisus flowing through Viotia from the land of Phocaeus has deposited quite a lot of soil. Further, Viotia was home to popular fertility cults where snakes and cows figured as primary symbols. Curiously, the giants referred to in Greek myth often appear with serpents attached to their legs or feet. This brings us to another possible etymology for the toponym as provided by the Ugaritic Button, meaning snake. The connection between snakes and fertility and healing was intimate in the ancient Mediterranean world. See, for example, Mercury's well-known caduceus, which has become emblematic for the medical profession. Moreover, the connection between the Rephaim healers, the snakes, find support in Ugaritic reference. Rupubulm, whose parallel name Labu is equated with the Babylonian dragon Labu and its constellation, the serpent Hydra, and the constellation Moose, also representing the chthonic healer god Ningizida. Thus, C. Virolode connects Rupublu with the healer Raphael in Jewish angelology, whose symbol is also the serpent. Further, as Astur points out, the feminine form of moose, serpent, also figures in the name of two mythical heroines, Murdenti, the wife of Danel, and Mitheri, the wife of Kret. The Ugaritic hero Danel, also called Munt-Rif-Rupi, man of Rapha, healing, Kret was well, is associated with healers. Greatly exalted be Kret among the Rephaim of earth in the assembly of the mighty, it said. Page 13. We may add to the above a biblical reference to the tribe of Dan, whose territory bordered on the Sea of Bashan. It's difficult not to see a play on the secondary meaning of the root button, meaning snake. Dan is a lion's whelp. It gushes forth from Bashan. Deuteronomy 33:22. Thus, the close relationship between snakes' fertility and the Rephaim suggests an amalgam of religious imagery and shared myth. There are additional parallels. The region of Viotia was famed for its cattle. In fact, the very name Viotia derives from the word cattle pasture, vo meaning cattle. Interestingly, the Hebrew Bashan frequently occurs in reference to bulls and cows. Take, for instance, the word of the prophet Amos. Quote, "Hear this word, you cows of Bashan," end quote. Ezekiel makes a similar reference. "Ye shall eat the flesh of the mighty and drink the blood for the princes of the earth, of rams, lambs, and of goats, of bullocks, all of them fatlings of Bashan." See also the words of the Psalter 22:12. "Many bulls have compassed me, strong bulls of Bashan have beset me around about." Moreover, it's important to note that in the citations above, the fattened animals are likened to powerful rulers in a pejorative manner. We have mentioned such insults in connection with the Ogigos and Og. Suffice it to add here that the term Viotia or Viotian can appear in Greek as a symbol for dull or stupid. The prophet Amos likewise uses Bashan in his rebuke of the haughty and overindulgent women of Samaria. 4:1. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan. Compare this with ebulus, use of Boeotian in reference to gluttony. The sea. We already have mentioned the possible etymological connection of Og with okeanos, meaning ocean, Anakim with anax, used in Poseidon's epithet, as well as Mount Hermon's association with the Leviathan, the sea monster. Interestingly, the Bible also connects Bashan with the sea. Marvin Pope observes, quote, Bashan is the mighty mountain which God Yahweh coveted for his eternal abode, Psalm 68:16. And in verse 21 to 23 of the same psalm, it said that God will shatter the heads of Israel's enemies and bring them back from the depths of the sea, so that Israel may plunge feet in the blood of their enemies, and their dogs' tongues will partake of the same. The co-location of Bashan and the depth of the sea suggests that Bashan has cosmic chthonic connections, end quote. Psalm 135 is particularly interesting in this regard, for it prefaces the mention of Shihon and Og battles with a proclamation of Yahweh's power, not only over heaven and earth, but also over the sea. Psalm 135:6. There is, of course, no way to reconcile the two locations geographically. Boeotia is in southeastern Greece, north of Attica and the Gulf of Corinth. Bashan is northern Transjordanian, approximately the area from Yabok northward to Hermon, between Gennesaret, that means Lake of Sea of Galilee, and the mountains of Horan. The geographical distance between the two locations, however, does not rule out the possibility that the legends have a common source. And if J.R. Bartlett is correct in postulating a religious sanctuary at Gilgal as responsible for the preservation and transmission of Og and Sihon tradition, we may posit that the diffusion of the myth stemmed from that locale. Nevertheless, it must remain speculation. Conclusion, page 14. In sum, the associations between Ogyges of Boeotia of Greece and Og of Bashan of Israel appear to be far from coincidence. Both are legendary first rulers with similar names and histories, and are connected traditionally with primal floods and the underworld. The places in which they rule also are similar in sound and meaning. Both Bashan and Boeotia were fertile places, and both have associations with cows, fertility, serpents, and the Semitic root giant. It's difficult to say just how these connections may be pieced together, but it seems likely that the accounts have a common origin and that they represent similar myths which conflate. And indeed, with R. Mundi, there is no reason. Quote, to support the existence of a single hypothetical proto-myth from which our attested versions have descended, the evidence rather suggests that these various mythic ideas were circulated around the Mediterranean at least as early as the Bronze Age, end quote. Nevertheless, the similarity between the accounts which concern the two figures is informative. Just why the biblical writers incorporate the legend of Og into their histories is difficult to say, and a kernel of historicity cannot be ruled out. But it is possible that the figures provided a now lost theological dimension. It will be recalled that when Zeus offered Gaia by imprisoning the Titans in Tartarus, Gaia stirred up her sons, the giants, to make war with the gods, and the giants were immune from death at the hands of the gods. Zeus knew that the gods could not win without the aid of a mortal hero. Thus he prepares himself by giving a mortal woman a great hero named Hercules as her son. In the Bible, a mortal hero also required to rid the land of Og, the giant, namely Moses. Moses' defeat of Og, therefore, would not be merely one battle among many en route to Canaan, but would have echoes of cosmic proportions. This would explain the high frequency with which Og appears both in biblical narrative accounts and in the liturgy. Likewise, Og's association with the underworld suggests that when Moses slayed him, to some extent he put down the chaotic forces of death. This would be a fitting follow-up to the parting of the Red Sea, which could represent Yahweh's victory over the forces of Yam, sea. Indeed, meaning sea, indeed Rahab connects the killing of Og and Sihon with the parting of the Red Sea when describing her fear of the Israelites, Joshua 2:10. And elsewhere we find Moses' annihilation of both Og and Sihon similarly equated with the miraculous events surrounding the Exodus. Evidence of conflation, that there were multiple traditions concerning Og, which underwent some conflation with other Aegean myths, can be seen by the manner in which Og meets his demise in Talmudic tradition. And here we find allusions to Achilles and Atlas as well, upon discovering that Moses' camp was 3 parasangs in size. Og says to himself, I shall now tear up a mountain of 3 parasangs and cast it upon the Israelite camp and crush them. After Og lifted the mountain in preparation for his attack, God sent ants which bored a hole in it, the rock, so that it sank around his neck. Note the reference to a huge necklace here. Unable to shake it off or to throw it at the Israelites, Og was caught in the predicament of Atlas. Where Moses saw this, he took a 12-cubit axe and struck the giant's ankle, killing him off. Achilles' heel. Now, it is, of course, impossible to know how or when these myths were transmitted, as R. Mundi correctly asserts. Systems of mythological thought are not the exclusive property of poets. They constitute a basic worldview shared by all members of society, and components of such a worldview can spread from one cultural area to another in any number of ways. Nevertheless, it seems reasonable to assume that, based on the presence of the Rephaim cult in Ugarit, the Phoenician tomb inscribed bearing Og's name, and the known influence of ancient Syrian art on Greek grave scenes, the direction of the transmission appears to be from east to west. If we accept W. Burkett's thesis that the Orientalizing revolution took place somewhere between 800 BC, after 800 BC, then we have ourselves a terminus post-quum. The association which the 2 legendary figures have with snakes might suggest a later date still. As for the vehicle of this transmission, it perhaps should be credited to the migrating craftsmen of the sacred itinerant seers or priests of purification of the ancient Near East, who transmitted not only their divinatory and purificatory skills, but also elements of mythological wisdom. To be sure, Pherecydes of Cyrus, from whom we derived much of our information regarding the origins of Ogyges and Typhus myths, is said to have learned it from the secret books of the Phoenicians, though he just as easily could have adducted from his Hesiod and pending future discoveries. However, we must refrain from judgment. Yet despite our inability to explain how or when these myths were transmitted or conflated, the numerous connections between the 2 figures suggest that Ogyges of ancient Greece Boeotia and Og of Bashan of Israel derived from a single myth or stem from similar mythic ideas in circulation in the ancient Mediterranean world. The author examines similarities between the legendary Greek hero Ogyges of Boeotia and the biblical giant Og of Bashan. In addition to the etymological connection between the name, the author analyzes the figure's shared textual association with primordial floods, kingship, gigantism, the underworld, the sea, military powers, battles with cosmic repercussions, and fire. He also investigates their dwellings, Boeotia and Bashan, for their pejorative nuances and their links to fertility, snakes, and cows. The author asserts that numerous points of contact between the 2 legends argue in favor of a shared Mediterranean myth, the examination of which elucidates us as to the theological significance of Og in the Hebrew Bible. So I've read the PDF for you in full, except for the notes, of course. And this is by Professor Scott Nogel, Chair, Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization, University of Washington. I'll leave links below for you for this. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.